The Mug and the Maiden, Volume 1 by Sir Wilton Moore. Wilson is who captured us, so this is not the same guy. Okay.
Yeah, it's Sir Wilton Moore, yeah.
Chapter 1, The Dangerous Forest. Once upon a time in a faraway land, there lived a mug of cheese. But it was not an ordinary mug of cheese as you would find in any home or kitchen of the age. No, this mug of cheese was a distant descendant of one of the 3 grand flagon kings, the same kings who had charged on horseback to defend their capital city during the unforgettable conquests of the previous century. To which of these flagon kings he hailed from, the mug was unsure. But still, there was honor and courage in his heart. His family heralded the deeds long past that had forever changed the course of stoop history. But did he have a name? Of course, all mugs of cheeses have names. It is common knowledge, just as every fruit bat is really named Stanley. The mug of cheese was named Richter the Cracked. What a name, I can hear you say. Cracked indeed. This mug of cheese bears no damage that I can see. Fall silent, you small-minded bass. For therein lies our intriguing story. Let's begin at the beginning. It was a hot winter day in the forest. One of those days where everything is dull brown. The lake was still, the birds had shut up, and the trees were but sticks in the overcast sky, save for a lone pine that skimmed the clouds above like a painter's brush. It was on this day that Mr. Darble Mouse was in a hurry. He had just been named as Vermin of the Year by the Society Brethren that lived under the old church, and was customary for the honoree to bring fine port wine cheese to the ceremony. There were only hours to locate some of the precious cuisine. Fortunately, Mr. Darble Mouse knew exactly where to find it, the dark cellar below the governor's castle. But unfortunately, as he approached the loose plank of wood in the gold wall, he failed to realize that the heavy rains that had come during the night had passed moisture into the plank, making it far heavier than usual. Thus, when he pushed the plank with all his might, it lifted just enough to push his body only halfway through. But his strength just couldn't contend with the weight of the plank, and his arms failed. The plank snapped back down, crushing him flat. After all, this story is not about Mr. Darble Mouse, or had you forgotten the mug of cheese already? I can see you might connect the two. Mr. Darble Mouse was, after all, looking for cheese, and we were talking about a mug of cheese just before. Sadly, I must inform you that there is no relation between Richter the Cracked and the rodent who is now nothing more than smushed guts inside the wall. Except that there is. For it was the death of Mr. Darble Mouse that started all the trouble. You see, when things die, they tend to smell, and that's just what Mr. Darble Mouse did. But that's not all. His body, pinned between the outside and the inside of the wood wall, had made a perfect passage for the hot summer wind. The wind, therefore, carried the stench of his decaying mouse carcass deeper into the governor's home. Like a snaking, twisting wisp of terror, the smell settled into a little tavern near the courtyard of the castle. Here, soldiers would spend many long hours when there was no bloodlust to soothe with battle. Strong ales and red meats filled the menu from back to front at this rustic medieval greasy spoon. Mostly, the customers came to look upon the barmaiden, Maxine, who was actually named Rita. Rita was by far the best-looking creature in all the governor's county. There was a beautiful dear woman just over the hill, but no one knew that. By day, Rita scrubbed her tavern so clean you could eat off of it, which was fortunate as it was a place you indeed would be eating, since it was a tavern. By night, she served her customers with charm, grace, but mostly with drinks. Did I mention that Rita was married? Well, I am mentioning it now. Rita was married. Her husband's name was James. He didn't do much. Until he died. The smell of Mr. Darble Mouse knocked him flat, and that, my friends, was that. Oh dear, the story has already begun, and already we've killed 2 major characters. Needless to say, Rita was deeply distressed by the whole thing. But 20 or so minutes later, she realized she couldn't mourn forever and went to buy some cheese. Ah, yes, don't worry, dear reader. This time, the mention of cheese will probably guide us to meeting our focal hero of the tale. Also, this is a good time to start a new chapter. Jesus Christ, where is this going? Where is this going?
So you can go to the previous page. Let's just see how many pages there are.
So 4 chapters. There's 4 chapters.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go through this and then we'll push forward. Chapter 2, a new chapter. Rita entered the cheese shop with her guns blazing. I am speaking metaphorically, of course, by which she entered the cheese shop quite determined to buy some cheese. This was because just the night before, as her husband James was taking note of a weird smell in the room, she had invented a delicious new concoction, the cheddar cider. It was sure to be a hit with her patrons. After all, the governor's county had only 2 exports, cheese and grapes, and she couldn't possibly make a drink from a grape. But back to the cheese shop scene. Rita knocked the counter loudly with her fist, causing the nearby cat to do absolutely nothing, as cats do. But behind the wall, she heard a stir as someone was crashing through piles of cheese to make their way towards her. Emerging gloriously from torn yellow curtains, an old man came into view. He was a giant in stature with a long gray beard. Bobbing along and stuck within his beard were all manners of cheese crumbs and wedges, wrapped tightly within his hairs. But yet, he held even more cheeses on ropes pulled across his chest, and loops of provolone linked like sausages over one's shoulder. His eyes were big, and her ears were bigger still. A smile of kindness erupted from his face, and he locked eyes with Rita. Mine!
So who are we gonna have to read dialogue?
Are we doing reading dialogue?
Should we?
I mean, yeah.
You're doing the narrative. Do you want me to read dialogue?
Sure.
Okay. My, the Kurds are kind to me this hour. Hello and welcome.
He bellowed. Rita bowed low and promptly began to cry. The shop owner looked at her, perplexed.
What did I say wrong?
The barmaiden sniffed and snooted and finally answered.
Forgive me, for my husband has just died and I'm out of Swiss.
I'm going to pause the story now. I'm going to pause now in the story to ask myself why Mr. Darble Mouse went to the cellar in the governor's house for cheese if there was a cheese shop nearby. I think it's best that we overlook this glaring problem in the plot, don't you? Now, back to the story at hand. Rita purchased a large amount of cheese from the shop owner. She bought cheese wheels and cheese melts and cheese slices. She bought cheese whistles and cheese bread. She bought cheese paper and cheese sandwiches. She brought so much cheese, in fact, that she had lost track of all she had obtained and just dumped all of the fromage into a large burlap sack for the return journey to the tavern.
Goodbye, Rita.
The shop owner called as he waved farewell.
Goodbye, Daniel.
She called back. His name was Murray, by the way. Overburdened by her treasures, Rita made her way home, following the main road to the castle. But as it always happens, the road was now under repair. A man with a skinny mule was plowing up the dirt so that he could put down new cobblestone. 4 of his associates were standing by, watching him. The job would only take a few years to finish, but Rita was in a hurry, so she followed the detour sign that told her to take a different road to her left. Unfortunately, no one could read in the governor's county, so she went right instead. The mishap took her deep into the forest, where absolutely nothing of interest happened. Except something of interest did happen. As she trotted down the road, her sack of cheese weighing her down, muttering complaints all the way, little did she know that the danger lay just ahead. This danger was cunning and dangerous, and had one of those out-of-place eyebrow hairs that drives you nuts when you're talking about someone who has one. This danger we will call Bernard, the big, ugly lizard man who wears a blue cloak. Bernard didn't often have visitors in his house. It was because he lived outside. Also, he was rather fond of human flesh, which made him very unpopular. So, obviously, you can see the drama unfolding here. The beautiful but tired Rita huffing and puffing up the winding paths as she approaches a certain doom. Bernard watching from behind a nearby tree, licking his lips. Oh, the tension's tense, is it not? At this point in time, we must pause again to ponder all the possibilities that can happen now in our story. 2 characters have died already. Surely a third wouldn't hurt anything. Are you perhaps just reading the story because you want to see who will get the axe next? You're a little warped, do you know that? Well then, let's see what happens next. Bernard stepped from behind his hiding spot, his eyebrow hair gleaming in the fading sun.
Dear madam, why must you pass through so fast?
He called with his eyes glimmering.
I must get home, Bernard, because, for one, it's getting late and I have customers to serve, and second, because you eat people,
Rita replied.
Poppycock, balderdash, codswallop. I won't hear these lies against my character,
he detested.
For I, Bernard, the big ugly lizard man who wears a blue cloak, have completely reformed myself.
Rita squinted suspiciously at him.
You have?
Bernard put a hand to his heart.
I have. I no longer prowl or pounce. I won't attack or bounce. I will not kill or maim or tear. I won't crush or even bite you anywhere. I promise I won't devour anymore. My gosh, you've become a bore. If you aren't going to be the danger in this story, then I've come all this way with 100 pounds of cheese for nothing.
Rita grumbled. She boosted her sack further up her shoulders and turned with an angry grunt, but Bernard waved after her in a panic.
Wait, it's all a ruse. I intended to eat you, dear woman, I swear it.
He cried.
It's all a trick, you see. A new angle. Oh, is he saying that still?
It's Bernard, yeah.
Okay. It's all a trick, you see. A new angle. It worked on some guy yesterday. Oh, please stay.
Rita sighed, her strength just about gone from the long adventure she had taken since she left her home that morning. She turned back to face Bernard.
All right,
she said.
But your part in this story better lead to an unexpected turn of events. Oh, it will!
Bernard clapped and waggled his clawed finger to motion her to draw nearer.
Just wait until the next chapter.
Chapter 3, the next chapter. All looked quite dire for Rita. Bernard had her within his grasp. Surely it would just be mere moments before his jaw collapsed upon her head. Oh, what a horrible end for Rita! Needless to say, I am worried for her. But as luck would have had it, miles and miles away, 20 years earlier, something amazing happened. 2 mugs of cheese, a Gouda, and a mozzarella welcomed their first son into the world. I don't think I need to tell you his name. It was Dave! No one liked Dave. After all, after that, their second son came forth, Richter the Cracked! Just called Richter at the time. Richter spent his early life stealing cowbells and putting them on skunks. This way, people always knew when danger was nearby. Needless to say, Richter was one smart mug of cheese. But all could not remain perfect forever. And suddenly, the great skunk famine began. Richter found his world in array, and he sought a new purpose. Fortunately, there was an opening in the governor's county for an adventurer at the time, and since he was a descendant of the 3 great flagon kings, he was boosted to the head of the line. Because, as we are all quite aware, even in the olden times, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Thus the adventures of Richter began! He braved deep dungeons, he slayed great beasts, he climbed the highest mountain peaks, he sailed around the world despite the fact that he didn't own a boot! Richter was truly the stuff of legend. But did I mention the curse? Yes, fair readers, there is a curse, a fiendish and terrible curse. One morning while Richter was in the governor's county, he came upon a witch named Witch. This witch had just pulled a pound cake from her oven, where she then proceeded to start ingesting it, right there on the front walk of her home. At once, Richter knew this creature was pure evil, eating cake this early in the morning, and without ice cream. This was truly a fiend that needed to be vanquished. Richter jumped her fence and pulled his sword.
Would you like some pound cake?
The witch offered. It looked quite delicious. Richter would not let himself be seduced into early morning cake as he approached her, closer with his weapon in her throat. The witch began to sweat with a mouthful of crumbs.
I also make a mean scone if you want to wait.
Now, no gentleman or gentle mug could refuse a good scone. So Richter withdrew his sword and patiently waited for the witch to create this new buttery pasties. Pasties. But what he didn't know is that she was wearing pasties. But what he didn't know was that the witch accidentally had bumped her table and had added within the mixture a vial of cursed liquid. See, I told you there was a curse. You were fair warned. The moment Richter ate one of the scones, he fell into a deep sleep. The witch, baffled, finished her cake and proceeded to get a civil service job in a nearby town. As the years rolled by, all that remained of the witch's house was carried off by elves, and her garden became overgrown. This left only Richter asleep in the forest, with no end to his dreaming in sight. But the story, thankfully, does not end here. No, for as luck would have it, a giant man covered in cheese with big eyes and big ears wandered past the sleeping mug. In case you've forgotten, this was the cheese shop owner Murray, sometimes called Bill. Unable to resist the cheese of any kind, even a mug of the stuff, Murray took Richter to his shop and set him on a shelf. Here, Richter sat for many years until this very fateful day. You see, in Rita's haste to gather up all the cheese she had purchased, she had swept a few things that did not belong into her sack as well. These items included the cat on the counter, a personalized pen, Murray's cash box. I think she'll be hearing about this one eventually. And last but not least, Richter himself, deep asleep. So now that our two stories have come together, let's discover what happened next to Rita and Richter in the climax chapter! Chapter 4, the climax chapter. It was the same hot winter day in the forest, and Mrs. Darblemouse has finally starting to get concerned. Just down the road, Rita was being drawn towards an almost certainly bloody and horrific end of her life. Bernard was just moments from taking her within his lizard jaws and mere hours from trimming his eyebrows. Rita stood her ground. She was no damsel in distress, but simply a person who was pretty darn tired at this point. She pulled the burlap sack of cheese from her body and swung it hard with every last bit of her strength she had left in her. An ear-shattering crack broke through the silent trees as the bag made contact with Bernard's shocked face. His teeth flew in all directions, falling like pebbles to the ground. His eyeballs dislodged and rolled into a nearby stream. His jawbone turned completely around and planted itself on the back of his head. Ow! Bernard ran screaming. Bernard ran screaming into the woods, never to be seen again this week. His cries faded, and the forest once again fell soft and quiet. A cow walked by. Rita's still standing with her sack of
Why is there a cow in the woods?
No, why is there a cow in the woods? Into the woods, it's time to go. I hate to leave, I have to though. Rita, still standing with her sack outstretched in her arms, stood wide-eyed at what had just happened. Surely no cheese in her bag was hard enough for that kind of impact. As she placed the burlap sack upon the dirt and peeled it open, she was amazed to find Richter, the mug of cheese, inside and looking quite dazed. He had awakened, and the curse was finally lifted. Somewhere behind a desk, the witch looked up and nodded with a smile. But oh, dear reader, look what was now upon his mug body, a giant and elegant crack! The very mark of a warrior. His hero's journey was finally complete. Richter the Cracked had emerged. Yes, it is true that Richter really didn't do anything important in the attack on Bernard. Just by Richter being where he was at the perfect time, he had saved Rita. The fates were with them. Richter and Rita talked and laughed and ate cheese. That's somehow mild cannibalism until the sun came down. Finally, they packed up their picnic and headed back into the tavern, where they were met with the cheers of excitement. This is mostly because the guys had found out that Rita was now single. As the night wore into the early morning of the hours, the tavern remained alive in the castle courtyard with singing and dancing and cheddar cider. Oh, what a celebration! But like all parties of such proportion, eventually everyone sobers up and you have to go home. Before long, it was dawn. The sun began to rise steadily in the west, marking a fresh adventure on the horizon. Wait, it came up in the west? Okay, yes. Sure. Okay, sure. A wind of a new direction began to blow with a more steady pace. It skittered across the ground and found its way between the floorboards of the governor's castle. Here, against all odds, it found the barely remaining body of Mr. Darblemouse. The wind carried the stench far beyond the borders of the castle, over the mountains, and deep within a dark cave where evil slept. What? Go ahead.
Oh, you want to do evil? Go ahead.
No, go for it.
Alright. What the heck is that smell?
Said Evil, awaking with hellfire burning behind his eyes. Eventually, the news of this great evil spread from town to town until it reached the ears of Richter the Cracked. He polished his sword and gathered some crumbs of bread to store in his mug. Wearing his best expression of courage, Richter once again set off to conquer the day. His story was not yet over. But for now, dear reader, we return to our own lives. So let us end this tale with one closing thought, shall we? Be we cracked, or small, or even dead, there's always a purpose to where we are all led. Be brave, be strong, and lest we forget, fate isn't quite done with any of us just yet. The end. As convoluted as this story was, it's interesting.
We had a good time.
Oh, 100%, straight up. I'm gonna have fun finding like fantasy, like fantasy bard music to play in the back of this. It's gonna be great.